Hello, Patreon family. I thought I would hop on here and answer your questions from the call for questions I posted about a week ago. Oh, it has been a day. So it's after midnight now. I've had a long evening with a sick 2-year-old. And I myself have run into some really rough, what you could call seasonal depression. It's all kind of the same depression to me, but here in the deep of winter, when rough brain weather comes, I just call that flavor of it seasonal depression. But I got out today, even with the sick toddler, and spent a long time in the sunshine, traipsing around in the snow. I got out in the woods for a bit, so that was helpful. All right. This is one of those times when I have this certain kind of depression, I do have trouble speaking a little bit. But I'm trying to take my own advice and not opt for creating nothing because I'm worried about not doing a perfect job. I'm trying to get better at taking my own advice and realizing that sort of that slow push for consistency over intensity is key, especially in the context of forgiving myself for, I don't know, not feeling my best, and especially talking to you folks who are my sort of inner circle of supporters and yeah. So I'm gonna try to make an effort here to be a little more vulnerable with this audience. So let's look at the questions. All right. So Sarah asks, I'm curious to know your top 3 favorite poets and why you love them. I am a little embarrassed of my top answer. And that is because my top answer is Shakespeare. And the only reason it embarrasses me is because I really hate the way Shakespeare, at least for a while, became some sort of strange cultural shorthand for intellectualism, which isn't what Shakespeare was. That's not who Shakespeare was writing for. But I just love the layers in Shakespeare. I love that he'll tell a fart joke and then make a wider point about nature, and then bring it all back to something intensely human, almost like a stand-up comedian trying to capture that spark you get from hearing someone articulate a shared experience so well. So Shakespeare is up there. I ended up getting a master's degree in Renaissance English literature, so it's not as if I was going to avoid Shakespeare. If we're going to do another not ancient, 17th, 18th century poet, let's do John Milton. I wrote my master's thesis on Paradise Lost. I actually have John Milton tattooed here also because I was deep into John Milton for a few years there. He was a poet that, how to describe John? Fascinating poet, did a lot of work for the English government. He wrote the devil as sort of an epic hero. And the devil is the most interesting character in Paradise Lost by far. Um, that's where you get the quote, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. And it was never the religious aspects of Paradise Lost that drew me in. It was the lyricism of the language. It was sort of this huge, sprawling, universal scope of the poetry, and Milton was very influenced by Greek mythology, Roman mythology, and so he would often cast sort of Judeo-Christian characters in these sort of roles of the epic hero, even into the Christian creation myth. God had to fight back sort of anthropomorphized versions of night and chaos, and here again, it's that turn to the epic and then bringing it into the small sort of personal pains that a lot of us can relate to. So yeah, let's throw John Milton in there. Do I really have to just pick 3? Because there are a lot. I mean, I love Elizabeth Bishop, poems like the Fish. I love William Blake. Sylvia Plath is wonderful. Irish poet named Seamus Heaney has meant a lot to me. I really love poetry. It's funny, people are often surprised that Mary Oliver isn't on that list, but the truth is I didn't really discover Mary Oliver until a lot of folks told me that my poetry reminded them of Mary Oliver. So now I've been reading some Mary Oliver, and I definitely understand and am flattered by the comparison, but in terms of nature poetry, it wasn't Mary Oliver for me. It was a little Wordsworth, certainly Walt Whitman. I've really sprawled far out of the 3 poet category, but I hope you'll bear with me here. I'm just making sure I'm recording because it's that kind of night. Another one from Sarah. Oh, okay. And I also want to know, what is your spirit animal? Well, I don't know very much about that tradition. But if you mean sort of the animal I associate with, I think I was having a conversation with Leslie the other day, and we were talking about what animal, if we suddenly had the power to transform into an animal, what it would be. And I think she was pushing the idea that I was a bear. Could be just because I'm large and hairy, but I think it also had to do with enjoying sort of solo traipsing around the woods. I feel drawn to the owl as well, maybe because I'm very nocturnal, and I like to sit in treetops. And I like to eat small rodents. No, not that last one. The owl or the bear? I don't know. We'll see. We'll see when nature grants me the power to shift into animal form. I'll let you know which one it is. Helena asks, of the popular world cryptids, the ones not exclusive to the crypto-naturalist, I mean, which would you most like to meet, or least like to meet? And which do you think is most likely that you could meet? It's easy. That's an easy one. If you let me choose which cryptid to encounter in the wild, it is the Mothman. And I'm not that far from West Virginia, so I think it is perfectly likely. I've been to the Mothman Festival down there in Point Pleasant multiple years. It's an interesting place to walk around. There's sort of an old theater there. You can go in and listen to eyewitnesses, and and then other presentations on things like UFO encounters that don't really have anything to do with the Mothman specifically, but seem tangentially related. Yeah, the Mothman. I want to know what the Mothman is all about. There was some talk that the Mothman was a portent of disaster with the collapse of the bridge associated with the first rash of sightings of the Mothman. Yeah, so there's just a lot of mystery. Which would I least like to meet? Jeez, I don't think there is one. I think I would be troubled to meet Nessie, especially if I was in a small kayak. But that's just because I have a healthy respect for large aquatic predators. But boy, if you gave me the choice, I'd still want to meet the Loch Ness Monster. Lewis says, to expand on Sarah's question, which poets do you think have influenced the style and content of your work? Yeah, I probably... It's funny. I don't think anyone reads my work and thinks Shakespeare or Milton or any of those Renaissance poets. I almost aggressively shun sort of the more florid kind of language. But I've spent the most time with those poets. Yeah. I spent a lot of time with a poet named Mark Halliday, too, that taught at OU. And Mark did not like my poetry. He would often give me the comment, weird. And in defense of Mark Halliday, at the time, I wrote much stranger poetry, or much more impenetrable sort of poetry that was really hard to understand. Whereas these days, I'm very interested in communicating clearly, to the point where I put clear communication almost ahead of the verse. Because I do a lot of idea-driven poetry where I really want to communicate an idea, and then I want to communicate that idea in an efficient and beautiful way, which is a little bit, well, that's just sort of organically where my poetry went. But I definitely played around with being sort of a language poet that did beautiful language for the sake of beautiful language when I was younger, and I've moved away from that. I think when you begin writing, there's a lot of art forms this applies to, but the natural, reasonable way you do it is you start with imitation, right? Imitation of poets that you read or enjoy or that give you that sort of spark of connection or a strange, dizzy feeling that there is a wider world that you can view through the work. And I definitely got that from Shakespeare. Yeah. And then I branched out from there. Well, it was probably before Shakespeare. I had a 5th grade teacher named Ms. Woolard, who literally took us out into the woods with pen and paper and had us just sit and write poetry. There was this huge swath of woods behind my elementary school that they called the Land Lab. Just this wooded hill with some paths, and we would go out there and write poetry. Yeah. It's funny, I don't remember reading poetry in that class. I know I loved Shel Silverstein when I was younger. But the highlight of that class for me, when I was 10 in 5th grade, was a book called My Side of the Mountain, which was about a boy in New York with, I forget, 8, 9 siblings in a small apartment that decided to run away to the Catskill Mountains and had done a lot of the research on how to live off the land. And he ended up living in a huge hollow hemlock tree. And for a long time, that was my life plan. So, yeah, a lot of my adolescence was spent learning edible plants and building my own shelters out. And I grew up on a few acres in sort of rural Ohio, and I would go out there and make my own shelters and spend the night in them on cold nights, to where my mother would be yelling out to see if I was frozen yet. Um, Lewis, I hope I answered your question. Um, it has gotten to the point where it's really difficult to say what is directly influencing me, because I have spent the last 30 some years obsessed with words and writers and poets. So I think all of that sort of combines into its own landscape, and what arises out of that is, it's difficult to trace my work back to specific influences. Second Lewis question: will there be more encounters with Dr. Pennington? Dr. Pennington. Yeah, probably. Just because I love the idea that the crypto naturalist has sort of a super villain enemy, and it's fun for me because the crypto naturalist has no sense that he has any enemies. So yeah, it's kind of a yeah, I don't know. It tickles me to cast him as sort of this weird superhero, but not in his own eyes, and so he has a nemesis but doesn't know it. Yeah, Dr. Pennington will return. Yeah, so, Dr. Pennington is being held up in a appropriately strange crypto naturalist way, but yeah, Dr. Pennington will be back. Michael asks, do you have any academic background in biology? How do you remember the experience of realizing that nature would be a major source of your inspiration for writing? Yes, I have a bit of an academic background in biology. I'll tell you that I was not a economically practical student when I was an undergrad. I graduated from OSU with nearly twice the number of credits that I needed to graduate, because I was an English major, but then I would take a bunch of comparative religion classes. I took the zoology series for biology majors, and organic chemistry, and I think I started as a biology major, and then several different English professors said, "Oh, you have to be an English major," and I sort of went back and forth and wound up in the English camp. But yes, I do have a bit of an academic background in biology. But more than that, I mean, a lot of my knowledge comes from, if I'm curious about something, it will take some time to read about it. And if you have the information literacy to sort of understand how to seek out sources, this is a good time to be a curious person. There's a lot of good free sources of information. I forget what I was curious about, but I was curious about something about an octopus, and went down a rabbit hole. I think that was last night. Yeah, I did a post about it. That was when I learned that octopuses don't have tentacles; they have arms. That a tentacle only has suckers at the end, which was new information to me. What was the second part of that question? How do you remember the experience of realizing that nature would be a major source of inspiration for your writing? I think it's more that nature has always held a very influential space in my life. So, my life is the place I'm writing from. Even as a very little kid, I don't know, before school, 4 years old, I would take daily nature walks with my mother. I remember we had a path, and in the spring she would point out when spring flowers were starting to bud. The spring beauties. We would look for the jack in the pulpit plants. We had green herons nesting near where we lived. I mean, there were just a lot of rituals around observing and appreciating nature in my young life, that I think I lost touch with for a little bit when I was sort of obsessing with trying to find a career, and through sort of losing touch with that essential part of myself, when I returned to it, there was a bit of an epiphany there of like, I stepped away from this thing, from this essential part of myself, my connection with nature for a moment, and that absence in my life really contextualized how important nature is to me. So yeah, it's not that I reach to nature for writing. It's that nature is always there. And so when I write, it's sort of my creative pursuit of choice. Nature is going to inform that. What's next? Sped buggery. What big epiphany in your life has stuck with you? Big epiphany. Well, there's the nature epiphany I mentioned. A big epiphany, there was no defining epiphany I could think of. There was an epiphany when I really realized the extent of the mental illness I was carrying around with me. Because for a while I tried to sort of pretend away depression and anxiety. I had all sorts of ways to do that. And I remember in my 20s being like, okay, well, that depression is a teenage disease. I had all sorts of terrible self-shaming things I would say to myself about it. So when I began to treat it seriously, and then began intentionally, systematically trying to build some support for myself and some skill sets to deal with it, that was a huge epiphany for me. Related to that is connected to something I said when I turned this on, the idea of embracing consistency over intensity. In fact, I was thinking of making another video just about that topic, partly for an audience and partly for myself, which is usually why I do those sorts of videos or a lot of my posts. But I have some of that stereotypical gifted kid stuff. I was very much one of those students that was put in a bunch of different gifted programs, and praised for innate attributes. How smart I was, not how hard I tried. And that can do certain things to a kid. For example, it makes it difficult to try and not be good at something instantly because of that continued emphasis on innate attributes versus acquired skills or effort. So if you're bad at something, that might reflect that you were bad, not that you have room for improvement. So that consistency over intensity thing is becoming more and more important to me, because it helps me work through the fear that if I try something, I might not be instantly great at it, right? And that kind of fear makes it difficult to do a lot of longer projects, like a novel, for example. you know, there are so many ways to burn out on even the idea of writing a novel, because you can't sit and do it in one session. Or even, if you do write a lot in one session, there is a looming awareness that what you've written isn't perfect yet. It's not ready for an audience. And it might never be. So it gets to where it's like, okay, well, no, I'm not going to try to write 2,000 words a day. I'm going to try to write 500 words a day. There may be days when that's impossible. So maybe it's I'll write 500 words, or I will try for a half hour, 5 days a week. And that's that consistency over intensity piece. But I have found that for me, that attitude is what actually gets the novel written. Because it's that permission to be imperfect, that permission to be, consistent, not intense. And it puts the emphasis on the process, not the product. So learning all of those things, and then the next step, which is learning them and then learning to apply what I've learned, I think that all wraps up into maybe my biggest central epiphany lately. That is all of the questions. Although, if you do have more questions, go ahead and post them. I'm happy to do these sorts of videos. Forgive me if I'm a little all over the place this evening. Yeah. I'm letting myself do this video imperfectly, which realistically is the only way we can do anything. So I hope you found those answers interesting, and sincere thanks for your support. Yeah, I couldn't do most of the projects that I'm currently excited about without you. So thank you very much.